It's time. Episode 46. Mark Watson, Martin Devlin. The Apologise to Me podcast. We're talking Commonwealth Games. We're going to talk about the All Blacks magnificent. We'll talk about the Warriors magnificent. We'll talk about the Ashes, the Open magnificent. We'll talk about the Women's World Cup starting tomorrow.
Apologise to me!
Watto, welcome back from China. The news yesterday that Victoria has canned the Commonwealth Games for 2026. Shock, horror, gasp. Not really. When you see the cost ballooning from over $2 billion to $7 or $8 billion, does this thing even have a future from here on in?
Yeah, look, I always say this. I think genuinely the last great Commonwealth Games for me, I mean, you'd go probably 1974, maybe sort of Edmonton 1978, but sort of beyond that, I think it's always lost its luster a little bit. And part of the problem is that individual sports now have their own world championships, which never was the case. And so the Commonwealth Games are always just a step below the Olympics. But look, it's also just blowing out in terms of the number of events. I was just doing some research. Go back to 1974, just 10 sports. Now, last year in Birmingham, we had 20. Now, I don't see why we can't just operate off 10 sports again. The traditional sports, the swimming, the cycling, the track and field, weightlifting, I think, has always been there. Those types of sports, whether, weightlifting, we can have a discussion on that one. But, now we've got beach volleyball, we've got netball, you name it. We seem
cricket,
to have
one
it.
Day cricket, we've got T20 cricket these days,
3-on-3 basketball, T20 cricket, which is just an absolute waste. So, look, I think it can operate, but I think we've just got to go back to those core sports. And I think it should be those core sports. I think there's a little bit of room for some evolution, but not a lot. How does the model look going forward? I mean, it certainly has to go to countries where facilities already exist. And I think the thing that holds New Zealand back from hosting it is, until we get a decent stadium that can actually put a 400-metre running track in, I think you're always on the back foot. But yeah, look, I wouldn't be disappointed if it disappeared. I don't think I'd miss it. I would have missed it. Again, I probably contradict myself a little bit. In my teenage years, I did look forward to it, even in the 80s. But yeah, I think I think each of these sports have their own iconic events now that surpass anything that the Commonwealth Games have. I don't think we really reflect back on our Commonwealth Games moments in recent times like we do with our Olympic moments. I think our greatest Commonwealth Games moment was probably Dick Taylor 1974. Philbert Bay 1974. You try and go back and remember, Martin, what were our great Commonwealth Games moments in the 1990s? What were our great Commonwealth Games moments in the 1980s? And they don't necessarily stand out, do they? Where I think, Martin, we've had this discussion in the past, I think what they're really good for is allowing athletes with genuine Olympic aspirations and athletes who generally want to win Olympic Games medals. It gives them an opportunity at a smaller level to experience a games village, to experience an opening ceremony, to deal with a lot of the peripheral things that can be a major distraction at the Olympic Games that perhaps they don't get at their own individual world championships, and we shouldn't underestimate that. But look, I just don't know who's going to want this. I've heard rumours too that, and I'm not sure, I've been away in China, but Brisbane are looking at trying to pull out of the Olympic Games in 232 as well.
Yeah, okay, so many different points there. Look, I love the fact that the athletes can go and compete at this, and I know that for a lot of our New Zealand athletes, that is the pinnacle. And for sports like squash, for sports like netball, these sports that aren't at the Olympic Games, I mean, this is close to it. I mean, you get your World Championships, of course. This is probably the next best thing, but it's an ever-changing economic world. And, and it's so important to put a perspective on it. You look at a country like New Zealand, and I know that, the sports minister, I mean, what a donut merchant of a title that is. I mean,
absolutely.
Floating this idea in 2034 to try and sort of galvanise some patriotism in the country when he's flailing and failing at the polls. The reality of it is, mate, is that for a country like New Zealand, if you're thinking like Victoria, that we can honestly afford $7 or $8 billion just to host a 12-day event. If it means infrastructure that we're going to have forever, if it means light rail to the airport, if it means the roads are going to be fixed, we're going to have proper motorways, we won't have potholes, if it means, that there is going to be accommodation built that means that can be passed on to people who are desperate for actually some decent housing in this country, which of course we get continually told that is happening, but is never actually happening, Kiwi Build and so forth. All of that I understand, but that's capital infrastructure that a government should be spending money on. to attach it to an event like this, to me, isn't the reason to do it. You should be bloody spending that money anyway. I get so frustrated. I know it's not a sports issue, mate, but every time I see Starship Hospital fundraising, my 2 kids went in there for operations when they were little babies, and I just love and appreciate everything those angels and saints do. But I get so wild at it going, why the hell aren't my taxes paying for this, Mark? This is what my taxes should be paying for. I want my taxes to be funding a kids' hospital so any child in the country can get emergency care. I don't want to have to dip into my pocket again after paying taxes to continually fund this. You see what I mean? So, to turn around and say that, hey, all of this money is actually worthwhile investing in these things for a sporting event, I just don't think that this day and age that people will accept that and will actually ride with that, because it doesn't sound good economic planning and sense.
No, look, I mean, sometimes in any society, you've still got to have some of those intangibles. You've still got to have that feel-good factor. You've still got to get a sense of nationalism. But as you said, Martin, I think we still get that with the All Blacks. I think we still get that with some of our national teams. You talk about pinnacle events. I'll still argue in sports like squash. I think if you talk to Ross Norman and Paul Cole and Susan Devoy and stuff, they'll still say the British Open. They'll still say the World Championship are far greater prizes than the Commonwealth Games. There's no reason why netball, just the World Championships themselves, I still think is a much bigger title than the Commonwealth Games gold medal. So, I think that's just a lot of spin from these organisations. Look, I agree with you completely. I've had family who have recently been involved in the health system here, and if it wasn't for the fact that, we've got some expertise who could assist in the process, very close family members, I'm not sure would be here now, because there are just so many frailties and flaws in our health system. I am just sick and tired of driving down the road and seeing cones and potholes, and this society just slowly just crumbling under the weight of economic pressure. And like I say, the Commonwealth Games comes and goes, 12 days. Would we really miss it? Is it going to be absolutely memorable in the names of 6 or 7 billion? And it comes back down to it. It's that basic term in economics, and that is opportunity cost. What else can we get for the same amount of money? And let's be honest, you talked about your kids having operations. Surely the life of a little kid. We all know, mate, when you have kids, you don't know what true love is until you have kids. Now, you just think how many kids' lives can be saved for $6 or $7 billion. And so I'm with you on this one, mate.
Apologise to me!
All right, let's talk about the All Blacks, and I hope that you got to watch that magnificent performance against the Springboks from China. And I just want to say 2 words to you. The first one is Bowden, the second one is Barrett. I'll add in fullback, and I'll add in best in New Zealand in that position. What are you? Got nothing. Nothing.
No, Martin, you might actually have me on this one. Big
Thank
guy.
you.
I'm never too big to swallow my pride and say, look, he had a very, very good test at fullback. Look, I'd still like to see, I'm not going to lie, I'd still like to see what Will Jordan can do at fullback. I'd still like to see what Sean Stevenson can do at fullback. I think we've got 3 players who can potentially play at fullback. Look, I thought it was an outstanding performance from the All Blacks. Really, really good, really pleasing. I think the thing that just frustrates me, Martin, I still just don't like this 3 years of losing games in the name of a World Cup, and we start to come right, and suddenly that's all deemed to be okay. Yet, our winning record falls from 83 or 84% to 70 something, and I just don't agree with that mentality. The only concern I still have, Martin, is can we do it 3 weeks in a row? Can we win 3 big games in 15 days? We're capable of beating any side in the world in a one-off, and I think Ireland are probably the same, and France are the same. And this is the thing that I think has frustrated me. Okay, so we've got to this point in 3 years of experiment, and it reminds me, to be honest, it does remind me a little bit of Laurie Mains. He was under a huge amount of criticism back in 93, 94, and pretty much got it right in 95 eventually. And we lost a lot of tests under Laurie, and then John Hart inherited a very good team and looked excellent in 96. Can this All Black team win 3 big games in a row? And I'm not sure we know, because they had an opportunity last year on the end of the year tour to put that in place, but we still chopped and changed. Are we going to chop and change again against the Wallabies? Are we going to give Roygaard an opportunity? Are we going to give Sean Stevenson? And my point is, no, the team that took on South Africa should play the Wallabies. Let's just have the best team now playing, because they need to play regularly. They need to demonstrate to us that they have the mental capacity to be able to put that performance together for 3 consecutive games against 3 quality opposition sides. Could they beat South Africa 3 weeks in a row? I don't know. You'd like to think they could, but I'm not sure, because we just haven't seen it.
Apologise to me!
The Warriors, Mark, and once again, it's da-da-da-da-da. Sean Johnson is playing the best rugby league that he has. He has for years, he has, and you are going to be a cheerleader alongside me. Yes, you are, because you got it wrong again. And come on, son. That's 2 in a row you've got wrong, Watto.
God, you're starting to sound like my wife, Martin. Everything I do is wrong, Martin. Everything I do is wrong. God, I was in China, mate. There were things falling apart here, and it was all my fault. I wasn't even here, mate. I wasn't even here. I wasn't even here, mate. Hey, Martin, look, you're right. I went on. Hey, can you send me one of your Can you send me one of those little cheerleading outfits you've got? You know, that sort of slightly shorter one, that slightly kinky one that you do wear. I must admit, it does look good on you, Martin.
Thank you.
But no, look. In fairness to the Warriors, mate, a stunning performance against the Sharks. Backed it up against a stunning performance against Parramatta, sitting 5th on the table here. You know, I still think they're probably a Kevin Campion type player away from winning this whole thing, but mate, they potentially could now, couldn't they? You know, I sat there last year and I heard the Warriors going, and I sat there last year and I thought, oh, what's going to be different this year? What's going to be different the following year? You know, there's just major things wrong within that organisation. But boy, I tell you what, this Andrew Webster's come along. He's defied all expectation. He has changed the game. And this could end up being hell. I mean, we could be on the cusp of Leicester City, couldn't we? We potentially could be on the cusp of being Leicester City. Sides are now looking genuinely at this Warriors team going, mate, they're not just the real deal. They potentially could win this damn thing. And I've always said this about New Zealand sport, and I've always said this about the Warriors. I believe it with Phoenix. I believe it, well, it's already been done with the Breakers. When you look at our history in sport, when we put our head down, we eventually end up winning. We eventually end up having those moments of nationalism. You see it on most sports. We've won golfing majors. You know, we've had guys toiling away on the PGA. Michael Campbell gets the breakthrough after a long wait. You know, after a long wait, going back to Bob Charles, you know, we've won Formula One World Drivers' Championships. We've just had Shane Van Gisbergen doing some remarkable things. At some point, it's got to be the Warriors. At some points, it's got to be the Wellington Phoenix. You know, we've done it in netball. We've done it in cricket. Well, not quite in cricket, but, you know, we've provided some pretty cool moments in cricket after years and years of disappointment. So why not be the year of the Warriors? Why not them add just a remarkable story to our rich sporting history? And look, I genuinely hope they can do it, mate. I don't like being a doom and gloom merchant, but it's but that's like the All Blacks. It's been a tough watch, and so, you know, we do get sort of socialised into, I guess, a bit of a negative mindset. And it's just a reminder at times, you know, sometimes you do have to be a bit more positive.
Apologise to me!
Well, be positive about the football ferns then. Fred de Jong was on the program yesterday and he was absolutely brilliant in his breakdown and analysis of this tournament. Because one thing, while you've been away, Mark, is the saturation coverage, which you know, fair enough. We've got a world championship in our backyard and this is going to be huge. The whole world is watching. I know we're only co-hosting, the whole world is watching.
Yeah.
But the saturation coverage from the mass sports media here in New Zealand. And I'm just so sick of the fluff and guff Kim Kardashian angles. Not one person in any of these newsrooms seems capable of actually analysing the teams at this tournament, the players, and who to watch out for. And Fred broke it down absolutely perfectly. He was naming names that I've never heard of. I've got to be honest about this. I don't know most of these players. I know the odd player, but I don't watch a huge amount of women's football, but I expect more from the overpaid newsrooms and the overstaffed newsrooms that actually have all these reporters who are constantly selling us stories about hair ties and mocking this and what food they like and what music they might listen to. Tell us who the bloody goddamn players are. Tell us who the teams are. And Fred also said, and truthfully, when asked, are we going to get out of the group? He says no. He says we're carrying a team of 7 or 8 ageing players who had their peak probably 7 or 8 years ago. These players, like the captain, Ellie Riley, who's on some kind of farewell tour for herself around New Zealand. And he said it's only when we fail at this tournament that they will clean all those players out and they will start again. And his honest assessment was that if we make it out, it will be something akin to a miracle. We've got Norway, we've got the Philippines, and then we've got Switzerland. We probably need 4 points. So, you know, all of the hype around this team, I feel, is just a balloon waiting to be pricked, which is a real shame. But on the other hand, the tournament is actually going to be excellent. And from the knockout stages especially, you'll get to see some bloody good football.
Yeah, look, I do firstly want to encourage people to try and get along, just even for the novelty factor. It is a Women's World Cup, and you should just go to say you've been. And I think it will be good football, and I think it'll be worth two or 3 hours out of your day to go and watch it. That's the first thing, and I'm going to go for those reasons. I'm not sure which game yet, but I'm going to try and get along to one. Yeah, look, I'm over, again, this just reminds me a little bit of the Women's Rugby World Cup with a lot of these mainstream media platforms now just a platform for women's rights, just selling the message, not quite with that sort of anti-man angle and, hey, we'll show you and the patriarchy's over and now it's time for revenge, which was very much the theme that came through the Women's Rugby World Cup. But, 5 reasons why you should watch it. Again, stop telling us we should watch it. Stop shoving it down our throat. Let people make their own decision. The reason why, they'll tell you how big the game is, these journalists, but the reason why they're not telling us who the great players is because none of them know, because none of them actually care.
None of them actually
genuinely watch it.
No, they don't.
And it's just virtue signaling. They're trying to make out somehow that they do. They don't, mate. And the reality is...
And even the feminist reporters, and I could name them by name, but I won't give them the publicity, especially from the newspaper newsrooms. None of these women have a friggin' clue about who these players are and who these teams are. They don't, mate.
And they don't watch it. They don't go out of their way. But when it's here now...
But they'll scream at us and go, you're sexist pig, because you don't. You don't yourself.
Yeah, and they pretend that they do, and they pretend that it's big. We said that in the past, Martin, when the Women's Rugby World Cup, and it's like, well, how many of you journalists actually went and watched a game? How many of you women went and then these same journalists went and watched Opaki Super Rugby this year, and they're going to watch the Farah Palmer Cup? None of them. None of them. And that's the thing. So they'll tell us how big it is, but none of them actually watch it themselves. None of them can report on those marquee players because they haven't got a bloody clue. And the reality is, mate, in the women's game at the moment, yes, it's big. Yes, and some of these names are starting to establish themselves, but it's still not the men's game, and it's still going to take some time to get there. So stop trying to make it out that it's on par, that the top women players are Messi's and the Ronaldos, and the reason why they haven't got publicity is because of some sort of chauvinistic media organisation still run by men, and there's some political agenda. It's the same thing, Martin. At the end of the day, it's just the commercial reality of where the game's
at. That's it. It's simple as that. It's called demand and supply. It's Economics 101, and if you can't understand it, get yourself an economics book and learn it. All right, let's move on quickly because I want to actually go. I want to finish on 3 really good positives, mate.
Apologise to me!
Wimbledon we saw wrap up on the weekend. We've got the Ashes again tonight, and then we've got the Open. And I want to mention these 3 things because both you and me love sport. And these 3 thrive on one thing. It's called tradition/history. Okay? And that is why they survive, and not only survive, Mark, they thrive. Because of the fact that they've been around a hell of a long time and they don't bow to the current mores of everything's got to be 30-second attention span and dick pic and Instagram.
Yeah. No, look, I think Wimbledon is just one of the great things, isn't it? I mean, I often use Wimbledon, when you talk about a cycle race, you might go, look, it's the Wimbledon of the sport. You talk about a sport, you always refer to it as the Wimbledon of a sport when it becomes the pinnacle event. Yeah, the thing for me, I think the women's game at the moment is lacking some genuine women's superstars that we can perhaps relate to. And so I think it's in a bit of a rebuilding phase. The Williams sisters are gone. Clearly, it looks like there's going to be a succession plan on the men's side. But, but also just the men's, once again, just another 5-set absolute thriller. And I think the women's game would still be better if we had 5 sets. I just think what it would do is just allow the players with just a great work ethic to possibly shine. And I get a little bit tired of the women's being over in 2 sets, and very rarely do we talk about a women's final the same way we talk about the men's final. So that's one thing I would like to see. But yeah, look, I love history and tradition. I love Augusta. I love the Masters. I just love those big events where you're right. Tradition is tradition, and you shouldn't bastardize it, and you shouldn't bow down to the do-gooders, and we shouldn't, wokeness creeping in. It is what it is. There's a reason why it is successful, and I think tradition has a big place in sport. I think tradition has a big place in society.
Devlin.
Have you seen my wiener?
The platform.